All right, so this is the second video here. I think I can finish it. Might take a third. Nah, it's probably gonna take a third one. But anyway, I'll read as much as I can. The element of the Arctic to which was never quite adjusted was the midnight sun. Boy, do I agree on that. To Luke and me, the light seemed to say it was constantly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, no matter what the clock said. And that's a good way to describe it. After a few sleepless nights, and after conquering the feeling that it was always time to quit work, we observed that the Eskimos and birds handled the situation by disappearing around noon at midnight for 2 sleeps instead of 1. Unfortunately, we never got the opportunity to join the birds and Eskimos in their rhythmic naps during the endless day. For the Gussiks had clocks and kept hours. The Gussiks, by the way, is the Eskimo corruption of Cossacks. Oh, that's interesting. And the first white men in Alaska. Eventually, we learned to solve our sleeping problem by pretending we were taking afternoon naps. Exhaustion just took care of the rest for the next 8 hours. And she just keeps calling them Eskimo in here, and she does in the book too, which is not wrong. People refer to themselves as Eskimo all the time there. But the more common way for them to call themselves is the Nupiaq or Nupiaq Eskimos. One of the things, considering how long she was up there, I'm surprised, and maybe it's just one of those things that changed over time, that she kind of gets wrong, or at least is different, is using that Eskimo instead of a Nupiaq so much. She also tends to mix the two Eskimo cultures. There's really 3, but we'll ignore the third one for a moment because it's pretty small. The Yupik and the Inupiaq. So for example, Julie was born on Makariak and then heads up to Barrow. And those are 2 different, that's like mixing Athabascan with Greenwich. It's not the same people. It's not the same group. So it's kind of surprising that she blurs that line as much as she does. It may just be a component of the 70s and people, were just looking at it differently then. Someone writing this book today wouldn't blur that line as much as she does. So anyway, written today, she would be saying Inupiaq or Inupiaq Eskimo. That doesn't make Eskimo wrong, but anyway. 5 miles down the gravel road from Barrow is the Arctic Research Laboratory. To this, we bumped each day in a town taxi. Oh, that's the word usage, interesting usage of the word bumped. Okay. To this, we bumped each day in a town taxi, a Jeep whose driver was skilled at dodging snowmobiles. Eskimos so admire these mechanical dog teams that they run them over gravel land in the summer. Not true anymore. Probably was true then. And the taxis, they still run them all winter, of course, the snow machines. And the taxis aren't Jeeps anymore, but there are still taxis everywhere. And it's also interesting that she's using the word snowmobile here. I'm assuming she knows the term that would be used there would be snow machine. But since she's writing this for a wider audience and to people in the lower 48, a snow machine is something that creates snow. I assume that's why she's using snowmobile. The other possibility is that the usage of the word snow machine instead of snowmobile might be something that has happened since the 70s. I can't tell you what. I can tell you by the time I got up there in 2000, 30 years later, nobody says snowmobile in Bethel, Barrow, or anywhere else. But maybe it was back then that people were calling them snowmobiles. I can't answer that question. Okay. Unfortunately, snowmobiles cannot really replace dog teams, of which there are only 2 left in Barrow for tourists to see. For when the snowmobile breaks down far out in the tundra, they are not warm, life-sustaining. Human casualties are high. So she talks about there being two dog teams left. Now there's 1. So that's something that there wasn't very many then, and there's even fewer now. Okay. The Arctic Research Laboratory is composed of Quonset huts, homes for staff, and a modern building of glass pilings. That's still true, still completely true. The complex is maintained by the U.S. Navy, which is why it's actually sometimes called, instead of, she keeps referring to it as the Arctic Research Laboratory. I've usually seen it referred to as the Naval Arctic Research Laboratory. But, she's making reference to the U.S. Navy there, so that's fine. And the U.S. Navy, and administered by the University of Alaska. So the college, I mentioned that the college is up there. That college didn't start till the 80s, so this would have been University of Alaska back then. Okay. About 13 families live on the grounds the year round, keeping such fascinating pets as wolverines and seals. That's not true anymore. Probably was true then, it's not true anymore. Gusik children are bused to the Eskimo school in Barrow. Off and on during the year, approximately 160 scientists from all over the world come to the lab to study the Eskimo, the circadian rhythms, ice flows, the effects of oil spills in the tundra, wildlife, physics, oceanography, and weather. The library is a goldmine of information on the Arctic biome. That's still true. Still scientists from all over the world. I've met people from everywhere except Antarctica. It is a terrific place in terms of having people from all over the world. Yeah, and there's not a school. That's still true. There's not a school for white and a school for native. It's everybody's mixed in, just like she's talking about there. It's all the same there. One of the first scientists that Luke and I looked up was an old acquaintance, Dr. Edgar Folk, Jr., who was studying the effects of leadership on the heart rate of the alpha male wolf, the leader of the pack. When we came to Dr. Folk, he was watching an alpha through a closed-circuit TV. A small radio was attached to the wolf, and it beeped to a cardiograph in the lab the rate of the animal's heart as he trotted around the enclosure with the omega wolf, the low wolf on the totem pole of wolf status. The alpha's heart rate was low and steady, and the omega's was rapid and frantic. Dr. Folk then returned the alpha to his pack. His heartbeat instantly went up and stayed there. When I heard this, my image of the wolf began to change. Here was an animal who assumed responsibility with such conscious effort and concern that it affected his heart rate. This, I said to myself, was a trait heretofore only attributed to man. Working with Dr. Folk was Dr. Michael Fox, the author of The Behavior of Wolves, Dogs, and Related Canids, as well as 2 children's books. A professor at Washington University, St. Louis, Missouri, Dr. Fox was running experiments on litters of pups to determine the characteristics of the alpha. He concluded that a wolf's leader is fearless, initiates activities, and sticks to jobs longer than other wolves. He makes all the decisions for the pack and communicates to them by voice, gesture, and pose. Luke and I began to study the language so we could, quote, talk, unquote, to the wolves. In time, we became rather good at the submissive grin and could recognize the signal of, turning the page, appeasement. Appeasement, that means when you're doing something just to make someone happy. Ears drawn back, mouth slightly open. We could grunt whine to solicit attention in a friendly manner and would greet the wolves with their own posture for hello, an open-mouthed smile. The most significant man-wolf talk, however, was between Dr. Fox and a wild alpha male wolf. One morning, the scientist opened the door of the wolf's pen and stepped inside. Gently, Dr. Fox bit him on the top of the nose. The alpha sat down before this, quote, leader, and the two conversed in soft whimpers. This was the genesis of Julie for me. For Luke, it was a different challenge. He'd wanted the wolves to talk back to him too. One day, he'd walked up to a litter of prancing pups, opened his arms, and picked one up. The puppy kissed him with a lick and tucked his head submissively under Luke's chin. Luke kissed his nose, and the game manager smiled. Take him home, he said. You are his alpha now. I was sorely tempted until I recalled the problem that a friend had with the pet wolf in Arizona. The wolf trotted off in the late afternoon and bring home groceries that had been delivered to the neighbors' back porches. He also gathered up boots chair cushions, garden equipment, and all manner of presents. Eventually, my friend had to pen the wolf to inhibit him for his need to provide for the pack. I'm not surprised about this whole wolf thing. Actually, one of the things Craig talked about was all of the weird pets they had had at various points in his life. They had all sorts of like weird birds you would never think of having as pets and such. Anyway, after supper in the sunny night, Luke and I would walk out on the tundra and try to understand the unique biome with a permanent frozen ground called permafrost. It's tough, durable plants and clouds of birds. In time, we came to a deeper understanding of the complex tundra and the relationship between the owl, weasel, lemming, grass, caribou, bird, fox, and Eskimo. The ecology of the Arctic is like a Chinese wooden puzzle. Each piece looks into others as if one is not right. And if one is not right, the whole thing falls apart. Of this complex ecology, Charles Edwardson Jr., an Eskimo leader of the Arctic Slope Native Association, said to me, "To survive in the Arctic, you must be innocent and respect nature. The white man rushes to the north and hence destroys it." He pointed to the beach in front of the Arctic Research Laboratory. A truck was dumping black stones upon it. "The Gussics are putting back the beach," he said. "They use it for fill. The ocean adjusts and begins to snatch the whole shore. It threatens to demolish the laboratory." The Gussics were paying for their lack of respect for nature. Towards the end of the stay in Barrow, Luke and I met Julie Sevingan, an Eskimo mother with 3 sons, an employee of the hospital, and wife of a hunter. Julie and her family gave Luke and me insight into the Eskimo in Barrow, Alaska in the year 1970. Despite sewing machines and radios, gas stoves and electricity, Julie was a part of the past. She had seen a 10-legged bear, a sighting that made her a shaman or a woman of great importance. Because Julie's husband had heard that I bore good credentials for from the lower 48 states, he invited me to his home to meet Julia. While we sat on the floor sewing warm mittens, I learned of bears and moons and family lore. Snowmobiles screamed by the door, jets roared overhead. In the kitchen, Julie's son chatted, and occasionally hard English gave way to the beautiful bell-like language of the Eskimos. As I sat among the plastics and machines, I lamented the passing of the Eskimo culture that had sustained these remarkable people under the adverse conditions of the world. Yet Julie was more comfortable because of her warm gas stove and her radio that filled the room with music. She could not, nor would anyone want to go back to the severity. But something beautiful has been lost. There are times when somebody comes into a culture that's not theirs and wants it to be pure and wants it to be something out of a storybook, and that's what's kind of going on here. People actually living the cultures like the combination of the new with their traditional. The white person who's coming in and new to this is saying, "Oh, it was so much better when it was traditional." What she's saying here is that she can't get over her own opinion on that, but she's also saying, this person, Julie, that she's talking to wouldn't agree. That Julie thinks that the combination is much better. And I've definitely experienced that. You have white people who are like, "Oh, why can't, it was so awesome the way they used to live. That was a better way of living." But the people actually living in there, the Inupiaq Eskimo that are actually living in it, are like, "No, the combination's better." So anyway, you have different opinions on it, and a lot of it sometimes can have a lot to do with how much education someone has. And this is an example of where sometimes someone might even have too much education, but we can talk about that later. Okay. As I left Julie's house, I realized we'd given the Eskimo everything but meaningful values. Because of this, some are violent, some are drunk, they are deprived. Many others, however, like Julie and Charlie Edwardson, are finding a new direction in the 10-legged bears in respect for nature. Just before we departed for Barrow, looks like we've gotten to the end of the 15 minutes. I will begin the next section right here.